Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good day, everyone. MBA Women International is pleased to present this webinar entitled Conflict Management, Effectively Dealing with Conflict. My name is Hannah. I'll be your moderator for this session. Please note that today's call is being recorded and all participant lines will be muted during this broadcast. If you need assistance at any time today, please email us at webinars@mbawomen.org. This session will last 60 minutes and include a question and answer period at the end. However, feel free to pose a question at any time during today's presentation. You may enter a question by simply typing it into the question box on your control panel and then clicking on the send button. These instructions will be repeated later in the program. At this point, I would like to introduce today's speaker. Rita B. Allen is the president of Rita B. Allen Associates, a provider of career management consulting and coaching services for individuals and organizations representing a variety of industries, including high technology, biotechnology, financial services, professional services, medical devices and pharmaceuticals, academia, healthcare, and retail and consumer products. With over 25 years human resources experience, her specialty areas include a variety of talent management offerings, including executive coaching, leadership development, management training, and career development. Previously, she held roles as Vice President of Marketing and Search Services with Gaddy & Associates and Human Resources positions with the C.R. Bard, BTU International, and Unitrode Corporation. And now it is my pleasure to introduce to you Rita B. Allen. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Hannah. Good evening, everyone. This is Rita, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. And I always enjoy speaking about this topic because I do think it's a topic that many of us struggle with. And as Hannah said, she gave you an overview of my background. The areas that I do focus are primarily executive coaching, leadership development, management training, and career development. And I also teach at a few of the local Boston area universities. I teach business, human resources, and leadership courses. So again, it's a pleasure to be here. And the topic of conflict is one of those topics that whenever we hear the word, it always or quite often has a negative connotation. And honestly, we should want to embrace it. I hope to be able to kind of switch that mindset so we can embrace it in a way where we see it as oh, can you hear me okay? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not sure if I lost connection or not. Anyways, as I was saying, conflict is one of those topics that typically has a negative connotation, and I'm hoping that we can sort of switch that and we embrace it as more of a positive, because conflict is inevitable. And really, when you look at the topic of conflict, all it is really is. I'm trying to get the hang of this. Okay, I think I'm back on track. Okay, let me just go over briefly the objectives. What I hope to accomplish in the next hour with you is to give you an opportunity to become more aware of what your own conflict style is. There are several styles. There's 5 different styles. And what can really help us to deal effectively with conflict if we are first able to understand what our preferred style is, and then understand how others are approaching conflict and what their style might be, but also be able to sort of step back and assess different conflict situations so that what we can hope to do is try some different approaches. And what I'll do is discuss 5 different conflict management modes that there are, and each one being applicable in different situations. And so that hopefully you'll walk away with an awareness that there are some other choices that we can embrace when we deal with conflict. So as I was saying earlier, what is conflict? Conflict is really one of those topics that we do kind of have a negative connotation. And when you really break it down, conflict really is any situation where your concern or something that is important to you is different than the other person that you're dealing with. And let's face it, how often does that happen in a day? A lot. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing, because once again, we want to think of conflict as a positive and something that's inevitable, because differences are good. We want to try to embrace differences, because then usually that means progress and there's some innovation if we're trying to think differently and embrace different ideas and perspectives, rather than everyone thinking alike and doing everything the same. So the first thing I would challenge you to do is change your mindset, and when you think about conflict, as a positive and something that's inevitable and something to embrace and value as we look at people and their differences. And what really some of the tools, techniques that are required to be effective in dealing with conflict first starts with self-awareness. How well do we really know ourselves? How well do we know our strengths? How well do we know our hot buttons? What are the triggers that really set us off? How emotionally intelligent are we? Which means, are we, and what makes us tick? But are we able to also manage our emotions? Are we able to manage those triggers? And are we able to read other people? Are we able to understand and really have empathy for other people? And are we good at building relationships? And how well do we influence? How well do we communicate? These are foundations really that can help us. These are all skills, tools that we want to have in our toolkit, techniques we want to get better at, so that then we can understand the different conflict management styles and how we might be able to handle conflict in a more productive and effective manner. So what I'd like to talk about today when we do look at conflict, there's a very popular instrument called the Thomas Kilmann Conflict Mode instrument. And what it does is it basically highlights 5 different ways that we can handle conflict. Competing, collaborating, compromising, avoiding, and accommodating. And just by those words, when you look at those words, you might actually make the assumption that perhaps a couple of those are not ones that we'd want to use. And yes, some of them we want to use a little more sparingly. But what I'd like to suggest is that for different situations, actually every one of these modes, there is an appropriate time when we do want to use it. And we want to develop the skill of being able to understand how to do that effectively. But realizing we have a choice. We don't necessarily have to handle all of conflict in the same way, which many of us will tend to do because we kind of do what comes most comfortably for us. This Thomas Kilmann instrument is actually a booklet. It has a questionnaire in it with about 32 questions or 34 questions. And it's kind of a self-scoring assessment you can take that then will tell you which of those modes you may tend to use more frequently. You know, typically there's 2 or 3 maybe that we will use more frequently. Sometimes there's 1 that we might use more frequently. But I'd like to at least just give you a little snapshot of what those 5 modes are all about, what it means, and how you might be able to understand these in a way that you can start to maybe check yourself and get a better understanding of which mode you might be using more frequently, and be able to identify modes that other people are using when you are in a conflict situation. So there's 2 basic aspects of all the 5 different conflict modes, a level of assertiveness and a level of cooperativeness. And so what we want to determine is we want to be able to build that skill of being able to step back every time there is kind of a conflict situation, assess the situation, and then try to determine which conflict mode would be the most appropriate for that given situation. Rather than just sort of take, for example, if I'm someone who tends to avoid more frequently, So rather than sort of taking a one-size-fits-all approach with conflict, really being able to step back and say, hey, in this situation, is really avoiding the most effective, or is it more effective to compromise or compete or collaborate? So the 5 different modes, you'll see where they fall on the level of both assertiveness as well as cooperativeness. So I'm going to walk through each one. First one, competing, which basically takes the position of my way or the highway. And I'm sure you're all sitting back thinking, oh, I know someone like that. Or maybe you see it in yourself as well. Now, even though you might say that this is probably not a good mode to take, there are times when you should. And the situations where it is appropriate, if you have an emergency situation, for example, God forbid if the building is on fire, we're not going to sit around and collaborate. We're going to follow the instructions given by whomever knows that building well. Or there's times when decisions just have to be made, whether it's a business decision or a family decision, and it's not a popular decision. It's a very difficult decision, but sometimes there is it's the only decision that can be made. Sometimes when, for example, when I was in human resources, many times, as an HR person, our role is to make sure that the company is not sued for anything. So there's times when we really have to push for something that's important that is going to protect the company, as well as any other professions. There's certain things that you have to stand up for that are really vital, that there's no, there is no room, there's no flexibility. And or times when maybe we have to defend ourselves. That's another time where it's important to maybe take the competing mode. So those are different situations where it would make sense and would be appropriate to take a competing kind of a role. The next one is, and if you look back on the grid, you'll see that competing is high level of assertiveness but low level of cooperativeness. So the next mode is accommodating, and this is when we really are putting our needs aside and completely taking care of the other person. So that the position here is, it would be my pleasure, which once again, there are times when it is appropriate to do that. Sometimes we just have to keep things in perspective and show some, be reasonable. I always like to say, think of every situation as on a continuum of 0 to 5. And where does it fall? If it's somewhere in that, in terms of level of importance. So if it falls in the, 0 to 1, 2 for you, then it probably would be, that's a time when you really do want to be accommodating to the other person, especially if it's a 4 or a 5 for them. Also, when we're working with someone who's maybe new and is still on a learning curve, and or they're developing in some ways, you want to give them some opportunity to do that. There's times where we just have to really keep harmony, show some good faith effort. And again, if it isn't an urgent situation, then it's good to sort of yield and accommodate to the other person. Sometimes when we have to do damage control or repair a relationship, that's another time where it's appropriate. And there are also times where, I may not be the expert in this situation. So maybe someone knows better than I, and so I should yield to a better position and let the other person accommodate them. And last but not least, there's times where we just have to kind of maintain perspective, keep it in perspective. Again, if it's really not that important, then it's not worth pushing, and sometimes it's good to yield to the other person. And with accommodating, here we have, it's kind of a low level of assertiveness. However, it is a high level of cooperation. The next one is avoiding. Okay, this is when we basically put it off. I'll think about it tomorrow. And I know personally this is one that I've learned to use, where I never did use it in the past. And because I tend to like to, confront an issue or deal with it and express my concerns and try to resolve it. But I learned the hard way that sometimes that isn't the ideal way to deal with an issue. Sometimes, again, going back to that continuum, if it's a 0 or a 1, then, it's better left alone. We get sort of pulled into the heat of the moment. We get pulled into, the emotion of the situation. And sometimes it's very hard to do that. A lot of times it's very hard to do that. But it's always, that's why it's important to be able to sort of give yourself some time and space to step back and assess the situation. Sometimes it just gets way too tense, and you really need to let it lie for a while. And I know that's where it's helped me. I've learned to use the avoiding conflict mode very appropriately, where, those times where you just need to sleep on it. You might write that email, but don't send it. Or you might be tempted to pick up the phone and have that conversation, but sleep on it. Wait until tomorrow. Sometimes you might need a couple days. And what I've learned is many times when I do that, I find that, the next day or 2 days later, it's not even an issue and I let it go. So sometimes, you end up keeping it in perspective and realizing that it wasn't a big deal and you just completely let it go. Sometimes you just need time to keep your emotions in check and think more clearly, and then you're able to, so it's good in buying time. If you just need to delay or postpone until you can figure out the better way to deal with the conflict. Sometimes when it is really sort of out of your area of expertise, or you've reached your limit and you know that you're not going to be able to add any more value, it's better to let it go. Or there's times where, again, this is where I know I've used it really well, is that I have I found that when I really thought about it, in the end, I'm not going to change the outcome. I'm not going to really be able to convince the other person otherwise for whatever reason. So there's nothing to be gained. I am not going to benefit in any way or change the situation or make it better. So when there's little to be gained, it's better just to leave it alone. And then other times where it's important that we allow someone else to take ownership. Maybe it's, again, something they're very passionate about, or maybe it's something, maybe it's a time where they need to shine. And so there's times where we need to allow others ownership for whatever reason. And then, of course, avoiding is a good mode when it's really not about whatever you're having a discussion or tension or conflict over, but that's more of a symptom of a bigger issue. And if you recognize that, then let it go, so that then you can really get to understand what the bigger issue is, and be able to resolve that. And avoiding is really, it's low on both aspects, in cooperativeness as well as in assertiveness. Excuse me. The next one is collaborating. And this is where we really say, okay, 2 heads are better than 1. That's sort of the position, because you really are consolidating and integrating solutions. This is when on that continuum, it's pretty much a 4 or a 5 for all parties involved. And so then, it's really important for you to look at how can we address everyone's solution, everyone's concerns, and come up with a solution that really is going to integrate everyone's needs and resolve them. It's also great when it's important for some learning. When let's say, again, you've got a project where it's an opportunity for people to really learn a lot about a new system or a new product or a new service for the company. When learning is important, it's important. It's appropriate. And then once again, if only when they're highly important issues should you even consider collaborating, because collaborating takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. And so you want to make sure that they're on issues that are truly of the highest importance to both of you. And then also collaboration is an appropriate mode when it's important to have all the perspectives, so that I can't do this without the perspective from my finance colleagues. We've got to merge our perspectives together. we can't do it without that perspective or whomever else. It's important that both really weigh in equally. And that way, too, it's important because you will get commitment from both. When you need both parties to be fully committed, that's when you collaborate as well, so that people don't feel like they've made a sacrifice. And also, again, in situations where maybe there is some damage control and relationships have really been hurt and you need to work on improving them. And collaborating is a high level of assertiveness as well as a high level of cooperativeness. Compromising is the next mode. And this is where we kind of say, okay, let's make a deal. So what we're saying is, it's important to me, it's important to you. It's not the highest level of importance. Maybe it's a 3 or a 4, but it's important enough that we do a little bit of sort of give and take. And we need to reach a resolution where we both feel like we sort of have equal power. Like I didn't have to give something, but I didn't get, and you feel the same way. And so we're both still committed. Sometimes it's a good temporary solution. Maybe we really need to collaborate, but we don't have the time to collaborate. So we might say, let's compromise for now and then determine what we do later. Or let's compromise now and then we're going to continue this discussion and collaborate further. It's also good when you've tried competing and it hasn't worked, it hasn't been effective, or if you've tried collaborating and it hasn't been effective, and this is a good sort of backup plan. And compromising is good when a more assertive mode might be harmful to the relationship. So whether it's competing or collaborating, if that might hurt the relationship, and that's more important, preserving the relationship, then compromising would be a good mode as well. And here you're sort of at the middle. It's the middle amount of assertiveness as well as cooperativeness. Okay, so those are the 5 modes. And again, there's the key is really to sort of step back, be able to assess the situation, and then determine which is the best mode, which one would be the most appropriate. And again, as I went through those 5, hopefully you've maybe started to see a little bit of maybe yourself in 1 or 2 or 3 of them in terms of which one you might tend to use more frequently. And then you might start to consider that as you think of conflict situations you've been in, as well as you move forward. And of course, we're talking about conflict. I mean, these are scenarios that, and these are skills that we certainly use at work, but they can absolutely apply at work, at home, and at play as well, with family and friends as well. And sometimes it's trial and error. We try different modes and see what works. Especially as I gave my own situation earlier, I didn't tend to use avoiding, and I have found that it has worked very effectively and has really diffused a lot of conflict that really was not necessary, would not have been necessary. And I've learned to use that really well. And that's what's great about these concepts and these tools. It can empower us in a way so that we can hopefully steer conflict in different directions before it arises. So that, once again, first we embrace conflict as a positive, not as a negative, because having differences can be good, it can be enriching, and it can be, it can make, it means progress. But of course, there are situations that, that can get very tense, and we can steer conflict in different directions by using these different modes and practicing them. And I'll tell you another personal story that was always an eye-opener for me, because I probably used competing a little bit too much and not realizing I was competing, thinking I was maybe collaborating, but in reality, I think I was maybe competing more often than I realized. And I had sort of an aha moment once when I had a conversation with my brother, and I remember him saying to me, and we were talking about some issues that we had to resolve, and he just got really frustrated with me, and he said, why do you always have to be so confrontational? And it really caught me off guard, and I said, confrontational? I didn't think I was confrontational at all. I honestly thought I was just being expressive and trying to be caring and resolve an issue. But it made me realize that just because I feel that it's, when issues come up, they should be resolved immediately, not everybody else thinks that way, and because of that, I was giving the wrong perception. So those are some learning lessons for me, and I've learned to really practice these 5 modes in a way that has been very impactful and effective, both at work as well as in our personal lives. So let me give you a few scenarios because I'd like to have you understand some of the differences. It would be so I'm going to do a little bit of role playing, kind of a one-person role play, but I'm going to give you a few different situations. So situation A is we have two peers that are going to, they're going to go out for lunch, 2 friends. They're trying to decide where to go. So person A is on a diet and person B has to be back at work for a meeting in 30 minutes. So time is of the essence to him. So, so I'm going to give you a couple of different scenarios, different modes that each of these to deal with this particular conflict that this pair of friends are having, and you'll see a little bit of the difference. So person A, who's the person who is watching their calories, says, let's drive downtown to Salad World. And then person B, who's the clock watcher, says, if you just want a salad, I'm pretty sure we can get that anywhere. Let's stop at the next place we see, and if it's not right, we'll move on. So maybe you've already figured out which mode each of them were in, but the calorie watcher, by saying let's drive downtown to Salad World, pretty much is taking a competing mode because she's just saying, okay, let's do this, period. And the clock watcher saying, if you just want a salad, I'm pretty sure we can get that anywhere. Let's stop at the next place we see, and if it's not right, we'll move on. She's collaborating because what she's trying to do is really, again, sort of integrate solutions for both. So that she's trying to make it work, trying to make it a win-win situation for both of them. Now, if she said, I know you're on a diet, I'm dying for pizza, why don't we go to Pizza Galore? I'll order a vegetarian deluxe, and you can just eat the vegetables off the pizza. That's compromise. I know, not a great compromise, but that's compromising because what she's trying to do is kind of find a middle ground where they're each giving up a little bit of something. And if person A was trying to collaborate, what she would say is, I know you're in a hurry, and I'm on a strict diet. Do you know of a place close by where I can get a salad? So again, she's trying to come up with a solution that's a win-win for both of them. If she was compromising, she would say something like, I'd really like to go downtown to Salad World. I know it'll take longer, but maybe we can get lunch to go and eat it in the car on the way back. So once again, it's kind of a let's make a deal, give and take. We won't eat there, but we'll get takeout. And so to give you an example of what avoiding sounds like, and I'm sure many of you have heard this one, it doesn't matter to me where we go. I know that's always the one that I never like, when no one wants to decide. It doesn't matter, I don't care. And of course, if the clock watcher was avoiding, she might even say something like, hey, look at that yard sale. Let's stop and look around. I'm not at all that hungry anyway. Again, avoiding it, really not trying to address it. So that's just kind of a friendly situation. So let's take another scenario that some of you may have encountered kind of a similar situation where we have person A, which is an employee who is desperate to purchase a new machine for a manufacturing operation. And then the next person, the other person that is the boss, the manager, who's watching capital expenditures very closely. So, so the employee says to the boss, I know how you feel about making any purchases right now, so I'm not going to push to buy this machine, even though I feel strongly that it would help us. And she's taking an accommodating mode by saying that, because she's really just saying, sort of just yielding to, not even trying. She's really just saying, I know how you feel, so that's fine, even though I won't even push it. And if the manager responds by saying something like, let me think about it and get back to you, they're taking an avoiding mode, which again, maybe might make sense in this scenario, because he might need some, or she might need some time to think about it and check it out. If the employee was taking a competing stance, she might say something like, I need you to approve the purchase of this new machine, otherwise I cannot do my job. So, she is taking more of a firm stand that basically is saying, you do it my way or I can't do my job. And if the manager took a competing position, then she might say something like, I'm not spending any more right now, and that's final. And of course, we've all had these conversations, right, or heard them from others. An accommodating response from the manager could be, I trust your judgment. If you feel strongly about this, we'll do it. If a collaborating response could possibly through purchasing, but if you can provide me with a study that gives me all the details and proves that it will cut expenses and increase production, then I'll try. Because you see that she's making an effort to say that she'll put it forth, and is just looking for some more detail, so that once again it's kind of a win-win for both of them. And if she was compromising, she might say, we have a freeze on spending, but if you can come up with the money in your own budget or reduce headcount to cover the cost, I'll approve the purchase. So you can see how, again, they're both giving something up. They're making a deal. And the collaborating and the compromising, sometimes it's really subtle, the difference. And it can be difficult to sort of figure out, okay, what's the best way to compromise versus collaborate? And the key there, just to keep in mind, is can you really make it a win-win situation so that you can both put your heads together and come up with a solution that I get what I needed and that is intact, and you get what you needed, and again, our needs are met fully, as opposed to compromising where we're both giving in a little bit. But again, see it as a give and take as opposed to just giving in. I know I've had, sometimes when I do this training, people feel like compromising is giving up, where I see it as gaining, because sometimes you do have to, it's negotiating. Sometimes you need to look at it as, okay, well, is having a piece of the pie better than not having pie at all? So again, this is where at the very core, the very foundation of a conflict situation, you need to be able to sort of ask yourself those hard questions to say, really, where does this stand on the continuum? If I look at everything from 0 to 5, how important is this for me? So that you can really keep it in perspective. Because even though it's in the heat of the moment, we might think everything is a 5 to us. In reality, it's not. In reality, there's a lot of things that are 0s, 1s, and 2s, and 3s. And being able to do that kind of stepping back and really assessing is key. All right, so I'm going to give you one more scenario, again, to hopefully make this come alive for you so you can see how these different scenarios could actually play out and the differences in these modes. So the third scenario is we have person A who is taking Friday off because his daughter has decided, or needs to, I should say, has not asked for it already, but needs to take Friday off because his daughter's just decided to get married. And so she's having this small out-of-town wedding ceremony, very last minute. Now, person A's colleague, however, had scheduled the same Friday off 6 months ago in order to help with the fundraising event that he signed up for. So we have person A is the father of the bride, and then person B is person A's manager. So manager of the person whose daughter's getting married and who needs the Friday off. So if he was to take a, let's say, collaborating mode position, he would say, I know we need to have someone here to cover customer calls. I'm willing to pay for a temp to take my place. Okay, well that would be a generous way to collaborate. And if he was compromising, he might say something like, maybe I can work the morning hours and Chris can cover the afternoon. So you can see where there's a difference. With the collaborating, to meet both their needs, so that he's still going to get his day off, but and the manager's going to allow him to take the day off. But he's willing to pitch in to do that. And then for compromising, it's different in that they're both going to work, so both he and his colleagues will work, but one will do the morning, one will do the afternoon. If he took a competing mode, he would say, I cannot miss my daughter's wedding. If I can't take this Friday off, I guess I'll have to quit. And his boss could say, our policy about scheduling time off in advance. Chris scheduled this date 6 months ago, so I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do. You can see the difference between competing and then, of course, avoiding. The manager could say, this is not my problem. You and Chris will have to work it out between the two of you. And if he was trying to take a collaborating mode, he would say, let's talk to Chris together and see if we can make a change. Maybe between the three of us, we can work something out. And if he was taking a compromising position, the manager, he could say something like, maybe we can get a temp in here to cover for you. Why don't you look into it? If you're willing to stay late on Thursday to train someone, I'll pay for it. So again, you can see how there's that difference where it's a give and take. They're making a deal. There's a compromise that they're both getting something but also giving up something, versus the collaborating where everyone's needs are met fully. And avoiding, if the father or bride took an avoiding position, he'd say, I don't know why Chris has to take the day off when the fundraiser doesn't start until 8 o'clock at night. Besides, we really need to hire a third person so we can avoid situations like this. Okay, so, this is not resolving anything, right? He's just sort of walking around, doing the dance, and not dealing with it at all. So hopefully this will give you an opportunity to just see how some of these might come alive. And the key points that I hope you'll remember is that, first of all, we do have a choice when we're in a conflict situation. And I hope that that can be maybe the biggest takeaway that you have from this hour together, is that you don't have to handle all conflict in the same situation. And be aware that there are 5 ways available. And this knowledge, knowing this, again, it can empower us, give us a greater sense of control so that we can start to steer conflict in different directions by choosing different modes and really trying to prevent them from escalating. And the other key point is, don't react so quickly. Give yourself time to think. And it's human nature. Many of us might just tend to react quickly. And when we do, more than likely, we are pretty much operating out of habit. So the key is to slow down, step back, and give ourselves some time to really think it through and make wiser choices so that we can assess which mode really would be the most beneficial in this given situation. And the last point is practice these different modes. You might not be able to remember everything that I've covered, but just remember some of the important guidelines. Like, if there's nothing to be gained, it's better to let it go. Or, you know, this is highly important. This is a 5 to me, and it's a 5 to my colleague. So maybe, you know, this makes sense to try to find a win-win situation. Solution. So collaborating would be the right one to try. And sometimes we need to try them, different ones, before we really know which one is the most appropriate for us, and which ones work and don't work. But, you know, step back, assess, and try different modes. And you know, try it, see if it works. If it doesn't, you try again. Hopefully, again, this has given you a little more awareness of your own style of dealing with conflict, understanding maybe others, and then knowing that there are choices. And I always say, you know, have this dialogue. Talk to other people. There's some resources on the next slide, some books and articles I recommend, and just try new things. You know, I love the quote, life begins at the end of our comfort zone. And I always like to say, get comfortable being uncomfortable. That's when we really learn and grow. And trying new things, you know, push ourselves out of our comfort zone and find out what works and what doesn't. But don't stop trying. And we do learn and we do adapt different ways of approaches of handling situations, and specifically conflict. Here's some resources and books and articles if you'd like to look into this a little bit more. And so I'd like to just open it up to any questions now. Any questions?
So we will now begin the Q&A. Please type your questions into the question box on your control panel and then press send. We'll give everyone a few minutes to type their questions. Here's one. Do you have any tips for dealing with who's seemingly always operating in a competitive mode?
Yes. That's a good question, because of course there is always, you will encounter that. And when you're dealing with someone who's in a competing mode, a lot of times, you know, what they feel like they need to know that you want to hear their input. They need to know that you want to give them their thoughts and their concerns consideration. So if you almost just, you know, ask them and say, what is it that, you know, what is it that you're afraid of? Or really kind of putting them at ease so that they understand that you are hearing them and that you're not trying to dismiss what they're saying, but giving them an opportunity to hear that, you know, they need to hear you out as well. And so it's almost just appeasing them in a way that they know that you're hearing them, that you're understanding their concerns, but sort of doing it in an assertive way, not in an aggressive way, but in an assertive way, letting them understand that, you know, you also would like to have them hear you out, so that, you know, a lot of times it's defensiveness that gets them to feel like they have to be sort of in that, you know, my way or the highway mode. But if you allow them, you know, to have sort of an understanding that you hear them and that you're working with them so that they can sort of let that guard down, that can really be helpful.
Great, thank you. Here's another. You are going to need to go through more than one style.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. If you are going to need to go more than one style, if the other person is difficult, where should you start?
So if you need, if you have more than one style, did you say, or if the person you're working with has more than one style?
If the other person is difficult, so you'll likely have to use a couple different styles.
Okay. So I guess what I would do is, what I'd recommend then is first try to understand which mode that person is operating out of. You know, because difficult can mean, I mean, it isn't always competing that is difficult. Sometimes avoiding is just as difficult. You know, I'm sure you've all heard the term passive-aggressive. That can be even more challenging to deal with because you don't know what you're dealing with because it's passive-aggressive. So first to identify what mode the person is operating out of. And then trying to really, again, sort of step back and look at the situation and what is the best situation, what is the best mode for the situation. And I think that's where it's really challenging because, you know, a lot of times we operate out of how are the people reacting as opposed to what's the situation and what's really necessary to resolve the situation. What's the best way to resolve the situation? But it's usually the emotion that gets, you know, and it's the person that we're trying to deal with rather than the situation. So trying to separate those two. And again, it's hard, but you want to try to be the one who can be the voice of reason and the one who can look at it a little bit more logically and objectively, so that you can maybe coach the other person if they are being difficult and or if they're operating from a few different modes. And sometimes we do as well. You know, we might start with competing and then go to avoiding, or we might do the opposite, or we might start with compromising and then go to collaborating. But try to separate the person from the situation and then try to really assess where they're coming from and what their motivation might be. But the bigger question is, what's really the issue at hand, and what's the best way? What's the best way to deal with with that conflict? What's the best mode given the situation, and not just the people involved? And again, let me say, I know a lot easier said than done. I mean, it always sounds great in theory and on paper, but of course, when we're in the heat of the moment, none of this is easy. But it does work when we try to exercise and apply some of these concepts. They do work.
Great, thank you. Another, what happens if you're a contractor and deal with a senior manager who will simply dictate everything with zero flexibility? Dictator style and not receptive to any inputs.
And you're a contractor?
Yes.
Okay, I think I would need a little more information on that one. But I guess just generally speaking, I think sometimes it may be, I won't say easier because I don't think any of this is easy, but it's sometimes not as difficult to keep things in perspective if you're a contractor or outside, you know, someone who is not a regular full-time employee. And I say that only because it might be a little bit easier to detach emotionally. But the bigger question, I guess, is what are the terms of the contract? Because if you're a contractor, you've been brought on to, you know, do certain things, and if you're working with someone who basically is dictating, is that holding you back from being able to accomplish what it is you've been brought in to do? So I guess I would try to sift through what are the desired results and outcomes expected of you, and if this person is holding you back from being able to achieve those, then it sounds like you need to have maybe a conversation that addresses what those obstacles are and how that's going to impact the results that are expected of you. If it's more of a style issue where it's just someone who is micromanaging and just doesn't let really give you any breathing room to do what you need to do, or is just overseeing everything that they shouldn't be. Well, again, I'm sure you've all heard the term "pick your battles." That kind of goes back to the, look at it on a scale of 0 to 5, and the things that they're dictating that that really are critical to you, that you don't want to or can't be dictated about, then you have a discussion. The others you either let go or you accommodate or you compromise. But yeah, it's kind of tough to say without knowing a little bit more. I'm not sure if that answered the question, but hopefully gives a couple of different ways to look at it. And then, of course, one of the benefits or advantages, not benefit, advantage, I guess, is look for another contract, if possible.
Great, thank you. What if there's no room for flexibility with an extremely competing individual? You are put in a position of feeling very uncomfortable.
Okay. Well, so uncomfortable, again, that could mean a lot of different things. If you're put in a position of feeling uncomfortable to an extreme of feeling threatened in some way, then actually that's the time when you would want to take a competing position as well. And that can come in different ways depending on what the scenario is, whether you address the issue yourself or get assistance in addressing it, or elevating it elsewhere. But that that raised a red flag to me when I hear uncomfortable. So I mean, that could be different things. Can you just repeat it one more time, that question? Hannah?
Sure. Let me just find it really quickly. But if you are dealing with someone who is competing with zero flexibility, then you end up feeling uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so again, I think if you're dealing with uncomfortableness, I think it just depends on the level of that uncomfortableness and what that the impact of that and what that means. So I think, but when you're dealing with someone who's basically just always competing to a point where it's not threatening in any way, but you just feel stifled, then at some point you do have to have a conversation, because then it starts to become really important to you. It's a vital issue and something that you need to really speak up about. So you probably need to sit and have a conversation in a way with that person that either you take a competing mode, or you take a mode where you're trying to be accommodating and really understand the why. Sometimes they just want to be heard. Someone who's competing might just feel they're being attacked, so their position is not being valued or appreciated. So sometimes they just need to know that that you hear them and you understand them and you want to work with them.
Great, wonderful advice. Thank you. So it looks like that's all the questions we have right now. If anyone has any last questions, feel free to submit them.
Okay, well, I just want to say thank you then. Thank you for the opportunity, and I wish everyone luck with any conflict situations that arise as you move forward. Again, conflict is an everyday occurrence. So, I always say we should just embrace it, and we can't change or control other people or situations. All we can control is how we react to it. And hopefully you picked up a few maybe strategies to try tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we conclude this presentation. Thank you all for joining us today, and special thanks to Rita for a wonderful presentation. A recording of this webinar will be available online at www.mbavinci.org. This concludes today's program. Thank you. You may now disconnect.